morning. A beautiful day in the house of the Lord. It's our honor and our privilege to share what God's doing in Uganda. Just a little background, GSF, our mission is to develop followers of Christ through mentorships and discipleships. We work with orphans who come from various backgrounds of poverty and destitute children from various villages around GSF. GSF is a orphanage and a primary school. The orphanage houses approximately 83 kids that live on site, and we also offer a Christ-centered education for up to 400 other children that come from 6 local villages. It's our goal to provide a Christian home for these children, to develop them into mature followers, to build into their lives, to show them, regardless of their circumstances, there's a Father who loves them. From any type of poverty, abuse, any situation that they may come from, we want to share with them that their Father loves them and their relationship with God is the most important thing in their life, not their circumstances. Good Shepherds also has a lot of outreach ministries. We employ 86 local Ugandan, and that's also part of the ministry, is to employ local people that builds the community. When we bring local people into the ministry itself, that's another opportunity for us to disciple and to mentor and to build those relationships. It's our hope that those relationships will build in a capacity that will allow them to go out in their local communities and make a difference in the other villages, to develop further ministries. There's also a clinic. We have a clinic on site that is primarily for the students that attend our school, the workers at the campus, as well as the staff. That is a very basic clinic that provides just minor medical care. Mercy Ministries is a big part of our program as well. We have programs that are developed to feed the elderly and to feed moms and babies. One of the big issues we see is that the infant mortality rate is very high. One way we can help solve that is by providing nourishment for mom and baby for the first year of their lives. I'm head of maintenance in the campus. I have a guy that works with me. He has just had a baby. They do not name the baby for the first year because of that reason. So they tend to not get too attached. Unfortunately, God took that baby at 4 months old because of a disease that we wouldn't even think about here that would be covered by a vaccination. That's kind of the destitute situations that we deal with on a daily basis. Sharon is controller of all visitors and visitor coordination and team coordination. She will be taking care of the logistics for the team and all their activities while we're here, while they're with us. And we appreciate you guys sending the team to come and spend time with us. It is a privilege to have teams come from America to experience the culture that God has placed us in, so that we can share that culture with you. Our mission is to experience that in a deeper level by having many visitors.
just want to say thank you so much for welcoming us into your church body today. We had a wonderful time of fellowship with the team last night, and we are so excited to be able to host just a few people from your congregation at Good Shepherd's Fold. Tom and I consider ourselves very privileged that God would consider us worthy to put us into service at Good Shepherd's Fold to serve among the people of Uganda. And I look forward to providing the opportunity for your church members to experience the ministry of Good Shepherd's Fold, and also just to experience the transformation that a short-term team that God can bring into the heart of someone who goes on a short-term team. We host over 100 visitors every year, and so lots of details and coordination go into that. But the primary thing about teams is God used a short-term trip to radically transform Tom and I's life. And so radically that he also used it to change the trajectory of our lives. If you had told us 5 years ago, even 6 years ago, that we would be on the mission field right now serving in Africa, we would have said no way. But God is a mighty God, and He can do amazing things in all of us. Never doubt that He has a plan for you, whether it's right here in your hometown or halfway around the world. God can use you in amazing ways if you are just willing to say, yes, God, I will be used. Couple of things I'd love for you. We would covet your prayers for the ministry of GSF. Some of the things that you can be praying for specifically would be that the children's hearts would turn towards God. A lot of these kids have gone through some very difficult situations, and just seeking to have their hearts turned toward God. For our impact in the community, that we would be a good and living example of Christ to the people that He has called us to serve. And for the missionary team, we serve with 8 other missionary families, that we would be a cohesive unit, and that we would love one another well. And for us personally, as your pastor said, we're going to be doing a lot of traveling while we're here on furlough. Safety and travel, that we would have good times with our family. We haven't seen them in 18 months, and so that we would just have a good fellowship time with our family, our blood family, as well as our church family. And again, just thank you so much for welcoming us. I can't get that word out. And I just pray for the pastor and his word that he's going to be sharing with us today. Thank you.
Days will come when you can't find the strength, when all you hear is you're not worth anything, wondering if you ever could be loved. And if they truly saw your heart, they'd see too much. You're beautiful, beautiful. You are made for so much more than all of this. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You are treasured. You are sacred. You are His. You're beautiful. You are more than what is were made for so much more than all of this. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You are treasure, you are sacred, you are His. You're beautiful. Before you ever took a breath, long before the world began, for the wonders He possessed, there was none more precious. Through all the earth and skies above, you're the one He madly loves, enough to die. You're beautiful. You're beautiful in His eyes. You're beautiful. You were meant for so much more than all of this. You are treasure, you are sacred, you are His. You're beautiful, beautiful. You're meant for so much more than all of this. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You're treasure, you are sacred, you are His.
Thank you, David, Tom, Sharon, Tim. I guess there is no way for those of us who have not served to know what it's like to sacrifice, and yet we are all benefits of those who benefit from ones who are willing to serve. There's no way for us to know how it changes a person's life to serve in the armed forces, especially those who have seen action. And whatever we do to say thanks is just never enough. It's always too little. I guess there is no way. How do you thank somebody for putting their life on the line so that you can have freedom and peace? Nevertheless, it's important that we do stop occasionally and remind ourselves of those who are among us who have made that sacrifice. And this Tuesday is Veterans Day, and so we do want you to know, those of you who are veterans, we love you, we appreciate you, and even though we can't understand your sacrifice, we do our best to value it. Would you stand, please, and let us show our appreciation to you. Veterans, thank you so much. God bless you. Peace requires fighting sometimes. It's not always automatic. Freedom is valuable. The Bible has a lot to say about both of those issues, freedom and peace. How do we get peace out of the midst of conflict? Would you join me this morning in Genesis chapter 31? Get your bulletin out, if you would please. Turn that over, get a pen or a pencil. We'll take a few notes as we go along. We are in our journey through Genesis. We're in Genesis chapter 31. We're on verse 44. Reading to you this morning from the New International Version, it says this in verse 44, "Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us." Those were the words, not of God, but the words of a man named Laban. And he's speaking to his son-in-law, Jacob of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham, the great patriarch of faith. And Laban is speaking to his son-in-law Jacob with a new tone. They've been together for 20 years. 20 years, Laban has really not treated his son-in-law as a part of the family. He's treated him more like a slave or a servant. He's taken advantage of him over and over and over again. The relationship is very hostile to the point that Jacob has tried to slip away and sneak away from his father-in-law because he's tried to leave before and his father-in-law wouldn't allow him to leave. He wants to go back home. In fact, God has called him to go back home to his family. And up until this point, Laban has always had the upper hand, but now the tables have turned, and God has given Jacob the upper hand, and Laban recognizes that, and so he comes to Jacob and he says, "Come now, let's make a covenant." He is, in essence, admitting defeat here. He is capitulating. He's recognizing the fact that his son-in-law, Jacob, has been elevated. The thing that he has regretted, that he has tried to keep from happening for 20 years, has now happened. Jacob thought he could get away from Laban without having to confront him. He slipped away in the middle of the night, so to speak, while Laban was busy, but God wouldn't let him do that. This encounter that these two men have had is important. We looked at part of it last week. Jacob had a word from the Lord to go home, and he was perfectly within his rights to do so, but he was doing the right thing, but he wasn't doing it the right way. And a lot of times we can do the right thing and not do it the right way. And if God had allowed him to get away with what he was doing, he would never have faced his fears. In Laban, it was the personification of his fears. He would have gotten away okay, but his fear would have been intact for the rest of his life. Maybe some of you this morning are walking around with a fear in your life and it's intact because you've never faced up to it. You've never allowed God to let you face that fear because you're afraid of what would happen. I understand that. We all have fears in life. But God wants us to face those fears and realize that He is greater. He is able to defeat whoever and whatever our enemies might be. And that's part of what's happening here with Jacob. Why trust God with our future if we cannot trust Him with our past? Do you trust God with your past? He can handle it just as well as he can the future. Look at verse 45. Jacob, without saying a word, in verse 45, he took a stone and he set it up as a pillar. Now this is interesting. 20 years earlier, before Jacob came to stay with Laban, he set a pillar up in this same part of the world. At that time, it was the incident that we call Jacob's ladder. Many of you remember that. That's one of the stories we learned as children in Sunday school, where Jacob had a vision of a ladder between heaven and earth, and he saw God, and God gave him a promise at that point. And what's happening right now is though that promise is being fulfilled. God promised to bless him, and he's been blessed. And God promised to bring him back home, and he's coming back home. But with all these former agreements that Jacob has made with Laban, and Laban has broken, why should he trust Laban now? Laban hasn't been trustworthy up until this point. Verse 46, Jacob said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took some stones, piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Yegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galeed. It, of course, is the monument. I guess what we're to see here is a pillar of stone and a heap of stones around it. It doesn't say specifically, but they give it two different names. Did you notice that in verse 47? These two men who have been at odds with one another for 20 years can't even agree on what to call the pillar that's supposed to bring peace between them. And the difference here is not what it means, it's simply the dialect. Laban the Aramean gives it an Aramaic name, Yegar Sahadutha. And the Canaanite, or the man from Canaan, Jacob, gives it a Hebrew name, Galeed. Both of them mean a heap or pillar for testimony. It means the same thing, but they use different words. It's a reminder that they are divided. But it's also a reminder that Jacob has come into his own. He's separate. He's able to be independent. Verse 48, Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it's called Galeed. It was also called Mizpah because he said, 'May the Lord,'" and notice he uses God's personal name here. You see the small capital letters for Lord, which is where Yahweh occurs in the Masoretic text, the Hebrew version of the Bible. And so on the lips of the pagan, Laban, the man who had household idols, who worshiped them apparently, he's coming around. He's beginning to realize that there's something unique about this man, Jacob. Jacob has been protected by God. God appeared to him in a vision when Laban was coming after Jacob, apparently with evil intent. And he said, be very careful how you deal with Jacob. And he was. Something about that vision instilled in his heart a fear of God, a healthy fear of God. And here we see on his lips the name Yahweh. He's using God's personal name, which apparently he learned from Jacob. May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. Here's another name, Mizpah, which means watch tower. Watch tower. Laban is beginning to realize that the God Jacob serves is the omnipresent, living God, the God who is everywhere. He can't get away from him. Verse 50, if you mistreat my daughters, if you take any wives beside my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. There's a little bit of irony in here because it was Laban in the first place who, through his trickery, caused Jacob to end up married to two different women. He only wanted to marry Rachel, but Laban tricked him, and he ended up marrying Rachel and his wife. And I'm wondering here if Laban has actually fooled himself into thinking that he has done what is right when no one else is watching. But nevertheless, what he says is true. It's true that God sees what we're doing when nobody else is watching. That can be a very troubling thought, depending on what you're doing. To be reminded when we're on our own and we're doing something that maybe we wouldn't want anyone else to see, to know that maybe nobody else can see us, but the person that matters most, God, is actually watching what we're doing. If we have a healthy fear of God, that is something that we actually think about. Only those who are devoid of a fear of God would say, nobody's watching. I can do whatever I want to. The Bible says that the fool says in his heart that there's no God. The fool says in his heart, I can do whatever I want as long as I'm able to get away from it. But Laban is dawning here. It's dawning on him. He's beginning to wake up and realize that there really is a living God, that there's more than just these little household idols that he was concerned about, that he used for his divination, that there is a God who is watching him and paying attention to what he's doing. Character is revealed by what we do when we're unsupervised, isn't it? What we do when we're unsupervised. Today is the 25th anniversary of an act of utter rejoicing in Berlin. I wonder how many of you remember that in November of 1989 when the wall came down. The wall came down. There's a lot of people in here now who may not even realize that. You've been born since then. It just seems like yesterday to me. I was 1 year old when they built that wall. You know, after World War II, Berlin was divided between the communists and the Allies in the West. And immediately, people in the East tried to escape to the freedom that was there in the West, to the economic freedom. And they were concerned about what was going to happen in Eastern Berlin because the communists were in charge there. And so many people fled from the East to the West, about 3.5 million, that a wall was erected by the communists, ostensibly to keep the West out of the East, but in reality, to keep people from the East to escape the West. And some people died trying to get across that place, that Iron Curtain, as it was called. And it stood there from 1961 until 1989 as a symbol of the division between not only economic freedom and economic oppression, but spiritual freedom and spiritual oppression, because on one side of the wall, officially it was an atheistic world, and on the other side of the wall, officially it was a world of religious freedom. But in 1989, an amazing thing happened. The wall came down. People stood on top of the wall and rejoiced. People brought pickaxes and chisels and hammers and began to break the wall apart with bloody fingers even, trying to grasp at the wall and tear pieces of it out. And to this day, there are a lot of people around the world who have little pieces of that wall. You may even know somebody who has a little piece of what used to be the Iron Curtain, the wall between the East and the West in Berlin. It symbolizes so much. It symbolizes more now in its crumbled state, in the little pieces that people have, in a sense, than it did when it was standing. Because now, in its crumbled state, it symbolizes freedom. It symbolizes freedom, not just economic freedom, but spiritual freedom. And when Jacob set that pillar up, what he was doing is he was setting up a symbol of something important. And it wasn't just a symbol of freedom or peace or any of those abstract concepts that are so important to us. It was a symbol of the witness between him and his father-in-law Laban. It was a symbol of the presence of God. It was a symbol of the presence of God. That's why he set a pillar up 20 years earlier when God appeared to him. He said, wow, this is the house of God. And he set a pillar up as a reminder that that's where God's presence was. So those pillars were important to Jacob. Let's answer a question on our outline. 3 questions this morning from this text. The first one is, why the pillar and heap? And that's an easy one to answer. Let's write that down on the back of your outline. They are or were a visible reminder of the invisible God. They were a visible reminder of the invisible God. Now, we also have visible reminders of the invisible God. On the slide, I've put the cross up there. The cross, for us, is an important symbol of the invisible Jesus Christ. He's no longer on the cross, but that cross reminds us of who he is, what he has done for us, what he's doing now, and what he plans to do for us throughout eternity. These kinds of visible reminders are important for us because we have a hard time getting a grasp on the invisible reality. It's hard. And the visible reminder of the cross is important. The Bible. The Bible is a visible reminder of the invisible God. It reminds us of the author of Scripture. Now, what happened in the Old Testament, unfortunately, is these visible reminders of the invisible God, like these pillars, ended up being worshipped. And so at some point, God had to say, tear those down and don't use them anymore. And we must be careful, too, that we never worship the visible reminder of the invisible God. For many people, this building is a visible reminder of the invisible God. When people drive up and down the street, they know that this building is different from all others, or at least it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place where God's people come together and experience the presence of God. But woe be unto us if we were to ever to begin to worship the building around us. That would be a mistake. It's just a visible reminder of the invisible God. Hold on to that thought. Let's keep going and see what happens next. Verse 51, Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. Who? The first thing you run into when you begin to study this passage is that I have set up. It says clearly Jacob set it up. But he just can't get used to the idea that Jacob's important. Everything is about Laban. But he's growing. We'll cut him some slack. He goes on in verse 52. He says, this heap is a witness and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you. And here's the important part. And that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. That's what he's really concerned about, because he has realized that Jacob is covered by the mighty living God. And he's afraid. He's afraid of what Jacob might do to him now. And he wants a covenant. He wants a covenant. He wants a witness. It's sort of think of it as a Bronze Age sticky note. Okay? That whenever they saw it, it's like, oh yeah, we're at peace with one another. If Laban ever came that far again, before he ever came into the territory of Jacob, he's to remind himself, I'm at peace with him, and the same thing was to be true of Jacob. Now look what he says in verse 53. May the God, here's the invocation at the end of his covenant, may the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and the God of their father, Abraham and Nahor were brothers, and the God of their father, his name was Terah, judge between us. Now this is really a very confusing statement, and if you're looking at a different English translation, it may say a variety of different things. And the reason is that there's some ambiguity here. The generic word in the Old Testament for God, Elohim, is actually plural, but it usually takes singular verbs. And so we know that we're talking about the one and only God. But occasionally there'll be a plural verb, and this is one of those places. It sounds like Laban is talking not about God's, He hasn't quite learned yet. He knows that Jacob serves a mighty God, and he has a healthy fear for Jacob's God now, but apparently he's still confused. He may still think that there are other gods too. He's still got some growing to do in his spiritual life. The NIV has just cleaned it all up for us to make it look like it's all monotheism. The Holman Christian Standard Bible is one that tries to capture some of the diversity that's happening here. One thing is clear in any translation: he gives God a rather unusual name. There's no other place in the Old Testament that it says that God is the God of Nahor. It always begins with Abraham. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not the God of Nahor, who was Abraham's brother. When God began to work in the lives of people and to extricate the whole idea of idolatry and to bring them to an understanding of the one and only living God who created heaven and earth, he began with Abraham in some special way. And Laban doesn't understand that yet, but it's a reminder to us that we need to understand who God reveals himself to be and not try to transfer our ideas onto who God is. And our main text for that is the Bible in your lap right there. So why make peace with someone who has been so hostile? I think Jacob realized that God was working in Laban's life. He heard Laban's testimony. Laban told him, "Your God appeared to me last night and told me not to hurt you." And Jacob realized, wow, God is protecting me even when I don't realize he's protecting me. That was one of the things that he needed to know. That's one of the reasons that he needed to come back and see Laban and not just leave with his fears intact. But look what it says in verse 53. It says that Jacob swore or took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. Fear there, or dread as some of our translations put it, is standing in for the name of God. God is a mighty God. We continue to learn new things about our universe. As you see the pictures this week that they have found of new planets forming and so forth, it's absolutely stunning beyond belief how massive and complex and beautiful this universe is that we live in. And every time the scientists say that it's bigger or older, I get down in worship and say, God is even bigger than I thought he was. The Ancient of Days is even more astounding than I thought he was, and I still have not even begun to scratch the surface on this one that the Bible assures us spoke into existence heaven and earth and all that are in them. That's a long journey, but it begins with an awakening and a realization, wait a minute, I am dealing with an incredibly powerful and mighty God. And the avenue toward loving God and serving God very, very often has to go first down the street of fearing God and realizing who he really is and how awesome he truly is and magnificent and powerful he is, that he has the power to back up the things that he says. There's something else happening here too. I don't know if Jacob realized it or not, but as a follower of God, as a follower of Jesus Christ, for those of us in the New Testament era, it is incumbent upon us to be peacemakers. We're called to be peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. They'll be called sons and daughters of God. In Romans it says, if it is possible, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everyone. Do everything you can. Now, it's true, with some people it's impossible to live at peace with them. They won't allow it. But it should be evident from the way that we react to others that we have done everything we possibly can to live at peace, even with those who disagree with us. Here's the second thing. Why did Laban want peace? Well, that's very simple. Let's write this down. Laban gained respect for Jacob from his fear of God. The only reason he's showing respect for Jacob is because he's learned to fear God. And isn't it true, church, that when we learn to fear God, our attitude about others begins to change, because we know that God is the God who made this person over here that I have a conflict with. God gave him or her life. God is just as concerned with him or her as he is with me. And if I fear God, then I better respect the people that God has named. Laban gained respect for Jacob out of his fear for God. And then look what happens at the end here. Verse 54, it says, he, Jacob, not only did he take an oath, but he offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and he blessed them, and he left and he returned home. No kiss for Jacob, but that's okay. We've gotten this far. You know, when they first met, Laban ran out to him and greeted him and hugged him and kissed him. Well, 20 years have gotten rid of all of that. No kissing and hugging, but we can at least part in peace, right? And they're able to do that. But I want you to notice what Jacob does here. Not only does he set up this pillar as an ancient Near Eastern sticking note to remind him of the presence of God, but he gives a sacrifice, and that's an act of worship. That's a recognition that God is at work. Not only do we have the pillar reminding us of the presence of God, but we have a sacrifice that says, God is here, and we need to act in the right manner, which means we need to sacrifice to Him. We need to worship Him. And they did. But it wasn't even just that. Then they had a fellowship meal. This was a peace offering, is what we would call it, looking back through the lenses of the New Testament, through the Mosaic Law. A peace offering to God, and then a meal, a fellowship meal, between Jacob and all the parties who were with him, and Laban and all the parties who were with him. It was an act of reconciliation. It was a visible act of peace. Peace with God, and peace with one another. If we want to have peace with one another, we're going to have peace with God. God's the source of all peace. This old world has been trying to find peace without God for a long, long time. I don't know how much longer God's going to allow that to go on. But I do know this. No matter how long He allows us to search for peace, we're not going to find it here apart from Him. He is the source of all peace. And whatever peace we have in this life, with Him and with one another, it starts with finding peace with God. I want you to notice in all of this, as Jacob wraps up his relationship with Laban, that Jacob is now wealthy, has a large family, he's been blessed by God just as God promised him. It wasn't easy. 14, 20 years of very, very difficult work, but God has blessed him. But it was about more than just being blessed. It was about more than just having an abundance. If all that mattered to God was that Jacob leave Padan-Aram with abundance, then he would never have had to stop and deal with Laban before he went back to Canaan. He could have just gone on, and God could have stopped Laban or told Laban, go back home and leave Jacob alone. But He didn't do that. He allowed these two men to meet out here in the hill country because something was happening. Both of them were learning something very, very important. One of the things that Jacob was learning was this: it's about more than God providing me with abundance and blessing. It's about me being a peacemaker. Even with those that I don't think I can make peace with. Through God's power, it's possible. Here's the last thing this morning. Why the sacrifice in the meal? Why the sacrifice in the meal? Peace. Peace with one another rests on what? Peace with God. Peace with one another rests firmly, securely on peace with God. November the 7th, 2 days ago, 1980, almost 100 years ago. Well, 100 years ago, pretty soon, the so-called Great War was coming to an end, one we call World War I now. The world was struggling once again to find its legs and get back to peace after a horrible period of butchery and destruction. But on November the 7th, 1918, on a little farm outside of a town in South Carolina, a boy was born. His family called him Billy. Billy grew up, gave his life to Christ. He began to tell other people about Jesus. He began to tell other people how to have peace with God and with one another. Billy's still with us. Last year, most of us probably thought that we wouldn't celebrate another birthday with Billy, because he wasn't doing too well, and right after that, he was in pretty poor shape. But he was 95 years old, and God had accomplished so much through him that I think everybody would have been okay if he went home. I know he would have been. But Billy Graham celebrated his 96th birthday this year, last week, and he's still preaching. The man's not going to stop preaching until God says, that's enough, come on, come home. He just recently put a video out, a 30-minute video called Heaven. It shouldn't be any surprise that what's on Billy's mind right now is heaven, because he's just a heartbeat away from going. And Billy, by the way, as of 2005 or 2008, I can't remember now what it was, whenever he was supposed to retire, and apparently he's not going to, at that point, best records say that he has shared the gospel, listen to this, with 2.2 billion people. That is absolutely stunning. Now, that's not the power of Billy, is it? That's the power of God, who's chosen this man, raised him up, and used him. But I thought it was interesting, his video, I haven't seen it, I want to see it, this 30-minute video, Heavens, maybe some of you have seen it. In that video, it includes some comments, and here's what he said. He's talking about how he feels in his old age. He said, I have found during the latter years of my life, when I've had sicknesses and been in the hospital and so forth, that there's a peace that resides there and stays there that I cannot explain. Everybody could have that same peace if they received Christ as their Savior. What a testimony. What a testimony. Do you have peace? This morning? Are you a peacemaker? Are you a peacemaker? If we're a peacemaker with those around us, it's evidence that we have peace with God ourselves. Would you bow your heads with me for just a moment?